What if I told you that the A through F grading system you grew up with actually had, like, absolutely nothing to do with measuring your intelligence?
Right, which is just a wild concept.
Totally. Because according to the manifesto we're diving into today, that A you were so proud to bring home on your report card was, well, it was never designed to show academic brilliance.
Not at all.
Yeah, the claim is that it was allegedly just a signal to future factory owners that you are highly proficient at following orders.
It completely upends, our traditional understanding of achievement. I mean, when you stop looking at the structure of education as this tool for enlightenment
Yeah.
and start looking at it as a mechanism for compliance, the entire architecture of society takes on a very, very different shape.
Okay, let's unpack this because for you listening today, that is precisely the kind of foundational paradigm shift we're exploring.
Right.
Our grounding material is a document detailing the highly controversial perspectives of an author referred to as Papa Bear, specifically from his Episode 2 manifesto.
Yeah, and it's a heavy one.
It is. The mission of this deep dive is to dissect his central thesis, which is the claim that the public education system isn't just, flawed or underfunded, but that it's an active scam.
A scam. Yeah, that's the word he uses.
Right. The author asserts this system was meticulously designed to rob children of their futures and keep elites in power by intentionally keeping the masses uneducated.
And before we break down the anatomy of this critique, let's just establish our operational ground rules here.
Good idea.
The manifesto we're analyzing contains sweeping, highly politically charged allegations about society, history, and the intentions behind modern education.
Right, and we're not taking sides here.
Exactly. Our role here is not to validate, endorse, or condemn these viewpoints. We are acting purely as your analytical guides.
We're just the messengers.
Right. We're going to objectively synthesize Papa Bear's core arguments so that you can examine the exact mechanics of his claims. We want you to understand the how and why behind his worldview entirely without us taking a side.
So to understand what the author claims schools are doing to students today, we actually have to start with how he says the system was originally built.
Yeah, going all the way back.
Right. And the text points a direct finger at American businessman J.D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil.
Right, the oil tycoon.
Yeah. Papa Bear asserts that Rockefeller single-handedly architected the structure of public education. But, I struggle with that leap in logic a bit. Like, why would an oil tycoon care about standardizing third-grade reading levels?
Well, if we follow the logic presented in the manifesto, Rockefeller didn't care about reading levels at all. He cared about industrial standardization.
Oh, okay.
The author draws this really sharp contrast between the era before this industrial intervention and the era after.
What was the before like?
So the document notes that prior to standardized public education, children from agrarian and small business families typically went to Sunday school, just for a few hours a week at their local church.
Right, just Sunday school.
Yeah. And according to the source, in that highly limited time frame, it took about 3 years for a child to functionally master the basics of reading and writing.
Wait, I want to pause on those numbers for a second.
Yeah.
A few hours a week over just 3 years.
That's the claim, yeah.
But then, according to Papa Bear, once public education was established, research was allegedly conducted to figure out how long it would take to, and this is his exact phrase, indoctrinate an entire nation.
Right.
And the magic number they landed on was 12 years.
12 years, yeah.
The math doesn't add up there. If you can learn the functional basics of literacy in just a few years of part-time Sunday school, what exactly is filling a 9-year gap of 5 hours a day, 5 days a week?
So the source provides a highly cynical answer to that discrepancy. He says you teach them, quote, everything about nothing.
Everything about nothing. Wow.
Yeah. Through the author's lens, the sheer length of the schooling experience is an intentional tool for behavior modification.
So it's not about learning facts.
Not at all. The goal of this prolonged exposure was never about accumulating valuable facts. The framework suggests public education is entirely about the training of minds to accept what to think, deliberately avoiding teaching them how to think.
It's essentially a hyperbolic time chamber for compliance.
That's a good way to put it.
It makes me think of the corporate world, honestly. It's like taking a highly efficient, 10-minute morning brief and intentionally stretching it into a mandatory 3-day corporate retreat.
Right, where you're just trapped.
Exactly. The goal isn't the meeting itself. The goal is teaching you to sit still, in an uncomfortable chair for 3 days without complaining, so that when they ask you to do it for 30 years, you don't even blink.
That is the exact mechanism Papa Bear is describing. By stretching the educational process over 12 years, the system allegedly drip-feeds students just enough information to function as workers.
Just the bare minimum.
Right, but it meticulously exhausts them so they never question the material they're being spoon-fed.
So if this sprawling 12-year timeline is, like, the psychological pressure cooker, how does the physical space of the classroom contribute to this conditioning?
Oh, it's a huge part of it.
Because the text argues the daily environment is just as manipulative as the curriculum itself.
Yeah, the document makes a direct mechanical connection between the classroom and industrial utility. What's fascinating here is how Papa Bear points to the rigid structure of the school day.
The 5 hours a day, 5 days a week thing.
Exactly, for 36 weeks. But he specifically highlights the auditory environment, the use of bells.
Oh, like the school bell ringing.
Right. One bell for recess, one bell for lunch, one bell to change rooms. The author asserts this was a deliberately engineered structure meant to condition young minds and bodies for future factory work.
It's the Pavlovian response applied to the assembly line.
Exactly.
You hear the bell, you move to the next station. You don't move when you're finished with your thought. You move when the bell permits you to move.
Yes, completely externally controlled.
And this brings us back to the grading system I mentioned earlier, because the author applies this exact same industrial logic to the A through F scale, which completely recontextualizes how we measure success.
The underlying mechanism here is essentially operant conditioning. By assigning a child's self-worth to a letter grade rather than actual intellectual mastery.
Which is how we usually think of it.
Right. But the source argues the system trains children to crave external validation from an authority figure. As Papa Bear claims, an A simply represented a good employee who followed directions without friction.
And an F?
An F represented a bad employee who didn't comply. You aren't learning math. You are learning how to please a boss to secure a reward.
That is, think about your own day right now. If you were listening to this while commuting to a 9-to-5 job, the author is arguing that your tolerance for that rigid schedule wasn't a conscious choice you made as an adult.
No, not at all.
It was hardwired into your nervous system by the school bells you answered when you were 7 years old.
And that economic conditioning extends to the calendar itself. We often accept the traditional September to May school calendars, just, the natural rhythm of childhood.
Right, summer break is just summer break.
But the document reminds us that this schedule was built strictly around the agrarian farming cycle. School ended in late May, so kids could work the fields for the summer, and it began again in September, only after the harvest was complete.
Oh, wow.
The source even notes that the origins of Labor Day stem from this exact agricultural cycle. It was a celebration of the fruits of that physical labor just prior to children returning to their classroom conditioning.
So, if the physical space trains the body for compliance and the calendar is tied to economic utility, what is the actual curriculum doing to the mind?
That's where things get really intense in the manifesto.
Yeah, because Papa Bear transitions from critiquing the historical structure to attacking the modern business of education, explicitly calling it a Ponzi scheme run by corporate America's publishing and testing companies.
The document lays out a very specific, self-sustaining loop to justify that Ponzi scheme label. According to the author, the mechanism works like this. The educational bureaucracy mandates that schools must teach more material.
Which sounds good on paper.
Right, but teaching more means districts have to buy more standardized tests.
Right.
And when students inevitably yield poor scores on those expanding assessments, the system points to those failures to demand a brand new curriculum.
Let me guess who sells the curriculum.
Exactly. This requires taxpayers and districts to purchase millions of dollars in new textbooks and workbooks from those very same corporate publishers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because there is a fascinating tension in the author's logic here. The framework calls this a corporate Ponzi scheme, but simultaneously Papa Bear complains that the curriculum guarantees stupidity through stupid assignments.
Yeah, he specifically calls out endless, mindless worksheets.
Right. And he points out that students graduate completely clueless about real-world applications. Like, they don't know how their own government works, how to file taxes, how to resolve conflicts, set personal boundaries, or manage a budget.
They're lacking basic life skills.
Yeah. So my question is, wouldn't a purely corporate system actually want kids to be highly proficient cogs who can at least balance a ledger or file their taxes efficiently.
That is where the author's concept of the complacency filter comes into play.
The complacency filter.
Yeah. Papa Bear asserts that universities and public schools do not filter for intelligence or even practical competence. They filter exclusively for compliance.
Wow.
The argument is that the system doesn't care if you know how to do your taxes. It cares about your endurance for bureaucracy.
So a straight-A student isn't necessarily the brightest in the room. They're just the person willing to put up with the most nonsense without rebelling.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The document explicitly states that the more crap, and that's his word, students are willing to put up with, the more successful they'll be deemed by the institution. Yeah, the less a student critiques the system, the more the system rewards them with accolades. According to the source, this ensures that any potential for genuine, disruptive critical thought gets nipped in the bud early on.
Because they're just chasing the grade?
Right. It places young learners in a perpetual academic deficit, rewarding them solely for their submission to authority.
Which introduces a massive, modern pivot in the source material. Because, let's face it, the American economy has changed.
Very much so.
Factory work and agrarian harvests are largely obsolete for the vast majority of the population. So if the system is no longer conditioning students to listen for the factory bell or prepare for an industrial assembly line, what exactly is it conditioning them for today?
According to the manifesto, the conditioning has evolved from physical labor to psychological alignment.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Papa Bear argues the focus has entirely shifted away from traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic.
The core subject.
Right. And moved aggressively toward social issues. The document claims that modern schools are primarily focused on themes like equality, diversity, inclusivity, white privilege, and systemic racism.
And the author frames this curriculum shift in highly critical adversarial terms. The text asserts that schools are actively cherry-picking historical facts to promote a specific narrative of victimhood, reparations, and what he refers to as reverse racism.
Yes, he's very direct about this.
Right. Like, for instance, Papa Bear claims that schools openly teach how the white man perpetuated slavery while deliberately omitting the historical context that Black Africans trapped and sold their own people.
Through the author's lens, this omission isn't just an oversight, it's an engineered agenda. Papa Bear defines the modern concepts of wokeness and cancel culture as tools designed for one singular purpose.
Which is?
Absolute behavioral control. The document claims that, quote, forces of evil are aimed directly at children in the public education arena. The alleged goal is to demolish the traditional family unit and intentionally divide the population along lines of race, gender, ethnicity, and religion.
The text actually contrasts this modern educational doctrine directly with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech.
Oh, right, the character versus skin color argument.
Exactly. Papa Bear points to MLK's ideal of judging individuals by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, arguing that current school curriculums are actively reversing that exact virtue.
Yeah.
And what I found particularly striking is the timeline the author presents. The source claims this psychological warfare, specifically the mechanics of cancel culture, is being taught to children as early as the first and second grades.
If we map out the psychology behind that claim, the author is arguing that introducing cancel culture during the most malleable years of human development represents a deliberate transition away from individual rights.
And toward what?
Toward tribal groupthink mentalities. Papa Bear describes cancel culture not as a tool for social justice or persuasion, but as raw psychological warfare.
The mechanism of that warfare, according to the document, is about the incapability to think and reason clearly in moral terms. Like, cancel culture isn't framed as a pursuit of truth. It's framed purely as the assertion of power.
Right.
It teaches children to dictate what their peers are allowed to think, what they can say, who they are allowed to support, and even who they are permitted to be friends with. It weaponizes the classroom social dynamic.
And the manifesto stresses that this requires a complete inversion of traditional human virtues. Instead of teaching young children charity or the grace of being slow to judge and condemn, the source argues the system is preparing students for the new frontier of wokeness.
The new frontier of wokeness.
Yeah, it achieves this by teaching students to constantly surveil and weaponize language against one another, ensuring they police themselves so the authorities don't have to.
So, if we step back and look at this entire architecture, a 12-year compliance chamber, corporate Ponzi schemes masquerading as curriculum, and psychological warfare dividing the population.
It's a lot.
It really begs a massive logistical question. If this system is as manipulative, extractive, and obvious as the source claims, how does an entire society continuously fall for it year after year, generation after generation, without tearing it down?
Well, the author's explanation for our collective blindness boils down to two things: distraction and the illusion of validation.
Okay, tell me about distraction.
Papa Bear argues that the masses are intentionally kept anesthetized by an endless barrage of entertainment. The document lists mass media, game shows, television, amusement parks, drugs, and alcohol as strategic tools used to occupy the human mind.
Just constantly stimulating us.
Exactly. The explicit purpose of this constant noise, according to the text, is to ensure the general public never has the silence or clarity required to interfere with the important people who are actually pulling the societal strings.
It's the modern bread and circuses. But the author goes beyond just distraction. To illustrate how we actively participate in our own manipulation, the source shares an incredibly vivid anecdote about a small-town jeweler and a local factory foreman.
Oh, the story is brilliant.
It really is. So every single morning for years, the factory foreman stops on the sidewalk in front of the jewelry store. He pulls out his pocket watch and meticulously sets it to match the grand clock displayed in the jeweler's front window.
And the routine goes on endlessly until one day the jeweler is outside sweeping the sidewalk. He finally asks the foreman why he synchronizes his watch so carefully every single morning.
And the foreman replies with absolute pride, right?
Yeah, he explains that he needs his pocket watch to be perfectly accurate because he's the man responsible for blowing the factory's quitting whistle at exactly 5 o'clock every evening. The entire town relies on him.
And the jeweler looks at the foreman, completely bewildered, and says, "That is fascinating, because I have been setting the big clock in my window to your 5 o'clock quitting whistle for years."
It is the ultimate metaphor for the author's thesis. It's a perfect closed loop of false validation.
Yeah.
As the source points out, the routine seems highly logical to both men in the moment. They both feel secure in their accuracy. But in reality, their perception of time could be drifting off by 6 months, and neither would ever have the independent metric required to realize they were wrong.
They're just echoing each other.
Right. Papa Bear concludes that modern society is playing an unrewarding, dangerous game of follow the follower.
So what does this all mean? I mean, think about the last time you blindly followed a process at work or accepted a rule in your community simply because that is how we do things here.
We all do it.
We do. When you reflect on that jeweler anecdote, it encapsulates the profound danger of living without independent references, clarifications, or confirmations. The author is suggesting we accept the 12-year school system, the grading scales, and the shifting curriculums entirely at face value.
Yep.
We are setting our societal watches to an educational whistle that is secretly setting itself right back to our watches.
Which brings us to the author's ultimate conclusion and his highly disruptive call to action.
Right. To summarize the journey we've taken through Papa Bear's manifesto today, we began with the assertion that J.D. Rockefeller architected a 12-year factory prep indoctrination system.
Check.
We explored the mechanics of an assessment Ponzi scheme that prioritizes corporate profit and student complacency over practical intelligence.
Right.
And we unpacked the author's highly adversarial view of wokeness and cancel culture as a form of psychological warfare engineered to divide society and demolish the family unit.
It's a massive critique.
It is. And based on this sweeping critique, the source offers one final, uncompromising piece of actionable advice to parents. If your children are currently in the public education system, you must remove them entirely.
This raises an important question rooted in the author's closing remarks. Papa Bear explicitly states that society does not need an academic war regarding public education. No, because in a war, he notes, it is the government or the centralized authority that dictates who your enemies are and where the battle lines are drawn. Instead, he calls for an academic revolution.
A revolution.
Yes. And the defining characteristic of a revolution, according to the source, is that you are forced to figure out who your enemies are entirely on your own.
It takes us right back to those foundational blueprints of the house. If you have spent your whole life assuming the walls around you were built to protect you, realizing they might have been explicitly designed to contain you, changes everything about how you navigate the space.
It really does.
So, we leave you with this final thought to mull over. If you were to completely strip away the educational system's framing of reality right now, ignoring the bells, the letter grades, and the mandated social narratives you grew up with, How would you go about identifying your true intellectual allies and adversaries entirely on your own?